I've come here today to do what the Republicans in Congress refuse to do, take the necessary steps to secure our border. 4 months ago, after weeks of intense negotiation between my staff and Democrats and Republicans, we came to a clear bipartisan deal. It was the strongest border security agreement in decades. But then, Republicans in Congress, not all, but walked away from it. Why? Because Donald Trump told them to. He told the Republicans, it has been published widely by many of you, that he didn't want to fix the issue, he wanted to use it to attack me. That's what he wanted to do. It was a cynical and an extremely cynical political move, and a complete disservice to the American people who are looking for us to not to weaponize the border, but to fix it. Today, I'm joined by a bipartisan group of governors, members of Congress, mayors, law enforcement officials, most of whom live and work along the southern border. They know the border is not a political issue to be weaponized. The responsibility we have to share, to do something about it. They don't have time for the games played in Washington, and neither do the American people. So today, I'm moving past Republican obstruction and using the executive authorities available to me as president to do what I can on my own to address the border. Frankly, I would have preferred to address this issue through bipartisan legislation, because that's the only way to actually get the kind of system we have now that's broken, fixed, to hire more Border Patrol agents, more asylum officers, more judges. But Republicans have left me no choice. Today, I'm announcing actions to bar migrants who cross our southern border unlawfully from receiving asylum. Migrants will be restricted from receiving asylum at our southern border unless they seek it after entering through an established lawful process. And those who seek to come to the United States legally, for example, by making an appointment and coming to a port of entry, asylum will still be available to them, still available. But if an individual chooses not to use our legal pathways, if they choose to come without permission and against the law, they'll be restricted from receiving asylum and staying in the United States. This action will help us gain control of our border, restore order into the process. This ban will remain in place until the number of people trying to enter illegally is reduced to a level that our system can effectively manage. We'll carry out this order consistent with all our responsibilities under international law, every one of them. In addition to this action, we recently made important reforms in our asylum system, more efficient and more secure reforms. The goal is to deliver decisions on asylum as quickly as possible. The quicker decision means that a migrant is less likely to pay a criminal smuggler thousands of dollars to take him on a dangerous journey, knowing that if in fact they move in the wrong direction, they're returned around quickly. And 2 weeks ago, the Department of Justice started a new docket in the immigration courts to address cases where people who've recently crossed the border and they make a decision within 6 months rather than 6 years, because that's what happens now. Additionally, the Department of Homeland Security has proposed new rules to allow federal law enforcement to more quickly remove asylum seekers that have criminal convictions and remove them from the United States. My administration has also recently launched new efforts to go after criminal networks that profit from smuggling migrants to our border, and incentivize people to give tips to law enforcement, provide information that brings smugglers to justice. We're also sending additional federal prosecutors to hotspots along the border and prosecute individuals who break our immigration laws. One other critical step that we will be taking, and that has made a huge difference. We continue to work closely with our Mexican neighbors instead of attacking Mexico, and it's worked. We've built a strong partnership of trust between the Mexican President López Obrador, and I'm going to do the same with the Mexican-elect president who I spoke with yesterday. We've chosen to work together with Mexico as an equal partner, and the facts are clear. Due to the arrangements that I've reached with President Obrador, the number of migrants coming and to our shared border unlawfully in recent months has dropped dramatically. But while these steps are important, they're not enough. To truly secure the border, we have to change our laws, and Congress needs to provide the necessary funding to hire 1,500 more border security agents. 100 more immigration judges to help tackle the backlog of cases, more than 2 million of them, 4,300 more asylum officers to make decisions in less than 6 months instead of 6 years, which is what it takes now, and around 100 more high-tech detection machines to significantly increase the ability to screen and stop fentanyl being smuggled into the United States. These investments were one of the primary reasons that the Border Patrol Union endorsed the bipartisan deal in the first place. And these investments are essential, remain essential. As far as I'm concerned, if you're not willing to spend the money to hire more Border Patrol agents, more asylum officers, more judges, more high-tech machinery, you're just not serious about protecting our border. It's as simple as that. I believe that immigration has always been a lifeblood of America. We're constantly renewed by an infusion of people and new talent. The Statue of Liberty is not some relic of American history. It stands for who we are as the United States. So I will never demonize immigrants. I'll never refer to immigrants as poisoning the blood of a country. And further, I'll never separate children from their families at the border. I will not ban people from this country because of their religious beliefs. I will not use the U.S. military to go into neighborhoods all across the country to pull millions of people out of their homes and away from their families to put detention camps while awaiting deportation, as my predecessor says he will do if he occupies his office again. On my very first day as president, I introduced a comprehensive immigration reform plan to fix our broken system, secure our border, provide a pathway for citizenship for dreamers, and a lot more. And I'm still fighting to get that done. But we must face the simple truth. To protect America as a land that welcomes immigrants, we must first secure the border and secure it now. The simple truth is, there is a worldwide migrant crisis. And if the United States doesn't secure our border, there's no limit to the number of people who may try to come here, because there's no better place on the planet than the United States of America. For those who say the steps I've taken are too strict, I say to you that be patient, and goodwill of American people are wearing thin right now. Doing nothing is not an option. We have to act. We must act consistent with both our law and our values as Americans. I'll take these steps today, not to walk away from who we are as Americans, but to make sure we preserve who we are for future generations to come. Today, I've spoken about what we need to do to secure the border. In the weeks ahead, and I mean the weeks ahead, I'll speak to how we can make our immigration system more fair and more just. Let's fix the problem and stop fighting about it. I'm doing my part. We're doing our part. Congressional Republicans should do their part. Thank you very much.
Politics with the war.
What was that?
I asked her, is Prime Minister Netanyahu playing politics with the war?
I don't think so. He's trying to work out a serious problem he has. Thank you.
President Biden there leaving the East Room as we see some of the politicians who were flanked behind him. I spotted Representative Greg Stanton, Senator Mark Kelly, Governor Kathy Hochul of New York. So we heard there the president announcing that executive action to partially shut down asylum processing along the U.S. Mexico border. This is a sweeping move. It will allow U.S. immigration officials to quickly deport migrants who enter the U.S. illegally without processing their asylum claims when border crossings surpass a certain threshold. The president says he is doing this because Republicans refused to do so. He said that that bipartisan border deal was essentially rebuked by Trump, and so he says Republicans bailed out. He says this is, quote, not a political issue that should be weaponized. I want to go ahead and bring in Samantha Vinograd again. She's a CBS News national security contributor and the former Assistant Secretary of Counterterrorism and Threat Prevention for the Department of Homeland Security. So just first off, can you outline for us what this executive action will do?
Certainly, this executive action is intended to deter individuals from making the incredibly perilous and dangerous journey up to our southern border, whether a land border or coastal border, to try to cross unlawfully. This executive order, which is intended to go into effect at 12:01 a.m. this morning, would deem individuals encountered between ports of entry ineligible for asylum processing. This executive order will remain in effect until irregular migrant encounters go below 2,500 individuals for the span of a week. The goal, again, is to direct individuals to the ports of entry for lawful processing and really to allow the system to even out because it has been so over capacity for so long.
The president says this is really only the beginning. He wants to do more. He says we need 1,500 more Border Patrol officers, 4,300 more asylum officers. From what you're hearing with their sources at DHS, are they echoing that they just need more help?
They certainly need more help. From an operational perspective, having worked extremely closely with Commissioner Troy Miller and others at CBP and at ICE, it is a fact that there just are not enough CBP and ICE agents at our southern border to handle the number and makeup of individuals who are appearing at our ports of entry and between our ports of entry. And that's why there was bipartisan agreement to increase resources for CBP and for ICE in the legislation that Trump really put an end to. So there is certainly agreement that from an operational perspective, we are over capacity, and that by deeming individuals ineligible for asylum processing in between ports of entry, we can free up capacity for CBP and for others to engage more efficiently at the ports of entry and through lawful pathways more generally.
Now, Republicans are saying that this is basically a ploy for votes. We're in an election year. They're questioning why now. The president did answer the why now in terms of the fact that he's doing this because that bipartisan deal fell apart, and he says he would have rather have done this with the cooperation from Congress. But are your sources understanding of that argument? They say they understand why now?
Well, they believe that my sources are indicating that the why now is because the system is just so strained, and that people that are seeking to come here lawfully through ports of entry, through other lawful means, need to be the focus. The administration is also just very concerned about the health and safety of individuals who are frankly being swindled by human smugglers, by coyotes in the Western Hemisphere, and making an incredibly perilous journey up to the southern border because of misinformation from these cartels and from others. And that we have just reached such a critical moment in our immigration challenge that the moment is now. Now, I do think that they remain hopeful that Congress will act to secure resources for the Department of Homeland Security that are desperately needed to process individuals lawfully. As the president mentioned in his remarks, there are thousands of more agents that are needed, hundreds, if not thousands, of more judges and asylum officers. So I do believe that they'll remain focused on trying to obtain those resources, Lindsay.
You mentioned the smugglers. Do you get a sense that this executive action will put a dent in that? We know that, for as long as we can remember, they've been profiting off of misinformation and fear-mongering. Do we get a sense that this might actually alleviate people being taken advantage of?
I think it's certainly going to take time. So in my experience at DHS, when there were misinformation narratives circulating about irregular immigration that the administration thought were putting individuals' lives at risk, there were efforts to try to provide factual information through trusted sources that would resonate on the ground to try to share factual information. And I do expect that the administration will be working with third countries, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Colombia, Mexico, and others to try to push out the factual information that individuals will be ineligible for asylum processing if encountered between the ports of entry, at least for the next week, and going forward if irregular migrant encounters go above 1,500 encounters over a 5-day span. So I think the partnerships with other countries is going to be key here. And I will note, Lindsay, that the president did mention the president of Mexico and the cooperation between our two countries, which has been decisive in leading to lower encounter numbers during 2024. In the month of May, there was a 54% drop in the first 3 weeks of May versus encounter numbers in December, and that's in large part because of work done between the United States and Mexico.
Do you expect this will be challenged?
I think it's already been challenged. I think that Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and the ACLU have already indicated that they will either challenge this in the courts or have expressed deep concern. So I would imagine that those cases are being filed as we speak if they haven't already. I do want to note that the authority that President Biden is using to implement this executive order, Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act, was utilized by President Trump former President Trump during his presidency. It was challenged in court, and ultimately it did go into effect. So there is a historical precedent for the president using 212F in an immigration context.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in that shot right before we pushed in onto the president, we saw Secretary Mayorkas. We know that the Senate dismissed articles of impeachment against him, but he certainly has come under fire, particularly from the right, over the administration's handling of the border. Do you expect that he'll continue to get embroiled sort of in the politics of this?
Knowing Secretary Mayorkas very well, I know that he will try to stay out of the politics of this. It is worth noting that on this executive order, the administration is expecting politics to come into play on both sides of the political spectrum. Republicans are already coming out and criticizing it, and Democrats are also expected to criticize it for what they perceive to be bans on asylum processing. And that's where the administration is focused on pointing out that they are not banning asylum processing writ large. 212F is not being used in a blanket fashion across our southern border. Instead, it is being used between ports of entry, and that asylum processing at ports of entry will remain in effect. However, Secretary Mayorkas is typically the brunt of political criticism on many issues, primarily on the immigration front. So I'm sure he's, buckling his seatbelt and getting ready for a bumpy ride ahead.
The president invoked the image of the Statue of Liberty and said he will never demonize immigrants, never separate children, obviously making a distinction between some of former President Trump's policies and his own. But what is the thread that you see the administration and DHS officials having to walk, the thin line between being a world of opportunity and a safe haven from people who are facing some kind of violence or political persecution, and controlling what has been described as essentially an uncontrollable border situation?
Well, I think from an operational perspective, most folks at the Department of Homeland Security would agree that operationally the border is in need of a lot of changes. There are just too many folks being encountered irregularly, which is drawing resources away from individuals who do try to come here lawfully. So the line that the administration is trying to walk is imposing operational constraints such that irregular migration is curbed, while trying to find the resources to process more individuals lawfully, whether it be through a port of entry or through some established immigration or travel process, whether that be asylum, refugee processing, parole in certain instances, visas, and otherwise. So the administration is trying to emphasize that they are strongly in support of regular immigration to this country. At the same time, they are in need of additional resources to meet the demand for regular lawful migration, while concurrently indicating that irregular migration has reached a point that is unsustainable. It's putting the country at risk, and it's putting individuals who are making the journey through irregular pathways at extreme risk as well.
Sam Vinograd, we are so grateful to you for all of your expertise and analysis. And we've been talking about the politics a little bit, but just to give you a sense, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was just talking about this. Let's go ahead and listen.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My assumption is the president is either speaking now or just as recently spoken about the border. Too little, too late. This is the biggest unforced error of this administration, in my view. All of this crisis goes right back to when the president was first sworn in. The policies he pursued created the crisis at the border, and it will not be solved by any executive step that he takes this late.
You can tell
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes was in the East Room, and she has run out now to talk with us from the White House. We appreciate that very much. Nancy, it seemed to me, from my observation of the president, that he talked quite a bit about the Republicans, in his words, lack of action, the bipartisan deal that fell apart, before actually talking about the substance of the executive action. What stood out to you?
Well, first of all, it's so interesting to hear the Senate Minority Leader say there that this problem is not going to be solved by anything that the president does now himself, after Republicans have been calling on the president for years to do exactly what he is doing now, to take unilateral action, executive action, to stem the flow of migrants across the border. President Biden, you're right, said repeatedly in his remarks in the East Room that we attended that he's only going this route because the bipartisan deal that the White House worked on with Senate Republicans and Democrats failed. It failed primarily because House and Senate Republicans backed away from the deal after Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee, told them to. He said, hey, look, I think we can get a better deal when I'm president. Don't give President Biden a win here, and you can blame it on me. So what President Biden argued today is that he's taking this step, and the White House is fully aware that executive action is more likely to be challenged in court. That's exactly what happened during the Trump years. It will probably happen again. The ACLU has already said it's going to sue, but that the president argued he has no other choice because this bipartisan legislation in Congress has stalled.
And the campaign for President Biden, they released a statement sort of coming out knowing what Republicans were going to say in their attack, saying President Biden knows being president is not about theater. So he's trying to get ahead of it. But he also made many distinctions between his own policies and that of his predecessor, including that he would never demonize immigrants, never separate children. What did you make of that?
Well, that is an important distinction because this White House knows that progressives excuse me, are pretty unhappy with this policy. This is the most stringent policy that excuse me, a Democratic president has ever enacted. And so there are no question going to be some progressives, some liberals who feel betrayed. They're already saying that publicly. And so President Biden is trying to make the case he's not going as far as his predecessor did. This policy, for example, doesn't apply to unaccompanied minors who come here on their own seeking asylum. But, you know, it's a difficult needle to thread on an issue that is very problematic for him if you take a look at recent polling.
Nancy, if you want to get some water while I ask this next question, it is allergy season. I'm pretty sure you ran to the camera. But you mentioned the thread that he's the needle he's trying to thread in terms of appealing the progressives who aren't in favor of this policy and really addressing the border situation. He's been getting a lot of criticism about, you know, why now? He addressed that a little bit in his remarks, saying it's because that bipartisan deal fell apart. But do you get a sense that that's one of the questions he's going to keep getting in terms of the fact that we are months out from a November general election?
No question. You know, there are progressives and some of the members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, for example, who have been speaking out today, saying that they are very disappointed. But this is a White House and a campaign that's very focused on the middle of the country, on independents that they will need to win re-election. And I don't think it's an accident that the president is making this announcement just about 3 weeks before his first presidential debate, in which he knows that he's going to get hammered on this issue by former President Trump. And, you know, now he'll be able to walk into that debate with something in his back pocket to say, look, well, you know, what do you mean I'm soft on immigration? I've just taken this really tough action. Now, the question is this action going to stand up, or will a judge basically halt it before it's really even gotten underway? It's supposed to take effect immediately, which means by tomorrow, these much more stringent rules are going to be in effect. And even though the administration says that the rules will then be lifted once we get down to about 1,500 illegal border crossings a day, that is a figure that we have not seen in the U.S. for years. So it's unlikely that we're going to hit that number anytime soon.
Okay, Samantha and Nancy, appreciate you both.